Well, hello again. Glad to be able to spend some more time with you here today, and glad that you were able to come together to spend time in the discussion. When we were together the last time, we began to make a study with the intention of answering the question, what about life after death? Kind of a compound question that comes out of the discussion, where did we come from, how did we get here, and where are we going? Now, for the believer, this is a settled question. We've decided that we're going to believe the Bible and that we're going to be happy with the answers that we receive there. We need also, though, to have a basis for our belief. I know that there are times when we just have to follow by faith, but it's not a blind faith, it's an informed faith. And the Scriptures give us much that can serve as a guide. There are biblical answers to the question, what happens after we die? We begin to get some answers when we look at Ecclesiastes, the 12th chapter, beginning in verse number 7. You remember we looked at it together last time we were together. The wisest man on earth says to one of his loved ones in the 12th chapter here, beginning in verse number 6, to remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. All of those, as we shared with you last week, are polite allusions to the subject of death. He said, remember your Creator. Live your life informed by the fact that He's made you and placed you on the earth with a purpose in mind. Because He said after death, verse number 7, points to a change that's going to happen. Something's going to take place that will move us from this realm where life is into an unseen realm where spiritual life continues. He says the dust will return to the earth as it was, but the spirit will return to God who gave it. It's that reality that we want to explore a little bit more here today. Now, we shared with you a passage of Scripture out of Luke chapter 16 as we began our close last week. And it's a passage we want to begin with here this morning as we advance our topic just a little bit more, answering the question, what happens after death? I'd like for you to notice that this topic opens up with an idea that is well known to the Hebrew, but maybe not as much to you and I who are Christians here today. It's the topic of Abraham's bosom. In Luke chapter 16, beginning in verse 19, it talks about two men who have a very interesting experience after their deaths. Verse 19, it says, there was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and he fared sumptuously every day. But there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, full of sores, who was laid at his gate, desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. So it was that the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. Pause for just a moment and let's think about this subject of Abraham's bosom and what that might imply for us as we think about the subject of life after death. The Scripture speaks of this place for the dead that's called in this passage Abraham's bosom. Maybe your translation or others you have will use the term Abraham's side. This beggar died, the angels carried him to Abraham's side. Now, there are a few things to notice about his experience. It's understood that this location, if we could presume to use that phraseology, if the spirit realm or the place where spirits live has some sort of corporeal reality? Is there a location? Well, I'll let you wrestle with that thought. But what we find here is that this is evidently some kind of place of honor. We see there Lazarus reclined at Abraham's bosom or his side. This is a position of great honor, by the way. In those days, when they reclined for a meal, the guest of honor at a banquet was positioned next to the most influential or important person in the room. So you would have two very important individuals. You would have the most important individual and then the guest of honor. And it seems that Lazarus is couched as the guest of honor in the story that Jesus presents, and he's at Abraham's bosom. He was reclining next to him. John the 13th chapter, verse number 23, speaks of one of Jesus' disciples in that same attitude. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. So it's a word picture that, painted by Jesus here, those disciples would readily understand. They've had the experience themselves. And so this is a place of honor, but there's also some promises that have been represented here. As you look at this idea, this concept of Abraham's bosom, this is the realization of God's promise to them. In the book of Matthew, the 8th chapter, verse number 11, Jesus makes this prophecy. He says, I tell you, many will come from east and west and will eat with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. The same metaphor used in that passage gives us the promise that there will be an opportunity for many, many righteous and godly people to be in close association with this one called Abraham here in God's kingdom, Abraham's bosom. Who was Abraham? Well, he was none but the father of many nations. He was none but the one that God had chosen to be the progenitor of the race, as it were. He is the prototype of faith, and he is the very father of all the righteous. It's an amazing study in and of itself. But having said that, Abraham's bosom, and this reference that Jesus makes to the topic is a very important cultural reality for the Jewish mind. And when Jesus introduces this topic into the body of his teaching, you and I, as Christians, ourselves need to reckon with the idea. What does it mean? Where is this place called Abraham's bosom? Where is this place known as Abraham's side? Well, some have said that it's synonymous with death. It's this spiritual reality that people experience once they've crossed over. Abraham's side, or Abraham's bosom, as it is seen by many as a synonym for that topic of death. Those who are in Abraham's bosom are those who've died. And so this becomes a very symbolic way of describing those who've passed on. Now, it could be, it goes a little further than that too. We're going to talk about some of the ways that people reckon with the concept. And while I'm not going to necessarily camp on one or the other, I'm going to present to you what some of the ideas are. Some feel like that Abraham's bosom is simply and only synonymous with death, the whole concept. But there are others that want to put a little finer point on the subject, and they speak of the subject of Hades, which is a Greek word, or Sheol, which is a Hebrew word. This view holds that Abraham's bosom is the unseen realm of the dead, known as Hades, known as Sheol, and that Abraham's bosom is a specific place. It's a place where the dead find their afterlife. Some want to go a little bit further and say that it's actually specifically the place where the righteous dead go. It's not simply only the general abode of the dead, but it's specifically a location for the righteous dead. Abraham's side, or Abraham's bosom, the specific place where the righteous dead find their existence. It's not to be equated with the general idea of death. It's not to be a place where all the, dead who've ever died might land up. It's a specific kind of dead that will find their way there. When someone was in Abraham's bosom, well, it's implied that they were the righteous dead. They were just not the general populace of the dead. And it's argued that Hades, this idea of a more generalized realm, is only connected with the rich man, while Lazarus is afar off in this other place. Some have used this terminology. They've called it a compartment in Hades where the righteous are. Now keep in mind, we're using language and we're making references about something that has been unseen, something that none have had experience with, and we're hearing it from one who's trying to communicate to a limited mind and an incredibly broad and difficult subject to understand. I think it's kind of like what happened in the book of Revelation. When John takes it in hand to try to explain what he's seen in this vision, and in that revelation, he takes in hand to try to describe that, and he does so in ways that seem to be superlative but fall far short of any clear and credible understanding. He talks about streets of gold. Are they really? He talks about walls that are 1,200 miles high, 2,400 miles high. He talks about millions and billions of angels, and all of these things that we see there in that revelation, we understand to be just mere representations, difficult to describe and harder to be understood. And it may be that what's being described here has been simplified so that a human mind can understand it. In any case, as we wrestle with the topic, we come to this subject of Abraham's bosom. What is it actually? Some have said, well, it's only a description of heaven. That it's just the idea that the righteous dead are going to be in this place called heaven. It has nothing to do with the unseen realm of the dead. It's not to do at all with any kind of compartment in Hades. That is just merely one of the terms that the Bible uses for being in God's presence. I told you that we were going to raise more questions than we answered in this discussion. And so my hope is that maybe you'll spend some time in discussion on that self-same topic. Maybe you'll ask the question and discuss it here in your group together. Is this just a word synonymous for the subject of death? Is it specifically Hades or Sheol? Is it only the place of the righteous dead? Or are we actually talking about heaven proper? So what do you think? Maybe you'll pause for a moment and discuss, and then we'll come back to the discussion when we're together again next time. Thank you. We'll look forward to seeing you soon.